Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and today I'm going to talk about handling and storing astrological talismans. So, I think right from the get-go, I want to make it clear that I don't think there's a definitive approach to this. Okay, I don't think there's one right way and everybody else is wrong. I think there's a lot of possible valid approaches. So, what I'm going to do is talk about, I think, what's becoming more and more, what I hear more and more, the sort of majority or consensus approach. And I'm going to talk about the devotional approach. This is the one I use. But as we go through this, I just want you to recognize, like I said, there's lots of different approaches. Which one you choose is really going to depend on your personality, on your sort of, methodology and your underlying assumptions, about talismans and magic in general. And so it's interesting. You can look at what people think about how talismans should be handled, and you can get an understanding of what their underlying approach is and what their view of magic and talismans really are. So like I said, but there's not a right way or a wrong way to do this. And anyone that says, oh, you have to do this, that might be true for them. It's not necessarily true for you. So like I said, listen to this, think about how you want to approach it, and then you can find the approach that resonates for you. So this was prompted by an email that I got from a client who got a talisman, and they had a lot of questions. And so they were very concerned, very worried about the handling of the talisman. And so they were said, does it have to be kept in the dark? Is it true it can't get wet? Is it true that you can't let anyone touch the talisman no matter what? And I was like, okay. And then as well as those concerns, which are becoming, I've heard more and more, what I hear constantly from people is this idea that you have to wear the talisman 24 hours a day and you have to wear it next to your skin. Okay, so people ask me, do I have to wear it in the shower? Do I have to wear it when I'm asleep? And so this is kind of, like I said, the wet, the not touching it, the dark, there just seems to be this sort of more and more and more things that are problems, okay, and more things to worry about, and more things that you got to do perfectly. And if you don't do these things, then it ruins the talisman permanently, or at least it stops the desired effects, and it may even cause bad effects. And so, like I said, I'm seeing more and more of the stuff on social media, or people asking me questions, and it's just because there just seems to be an increasing list of things that you can't do or you have to do. So I guess what I would say about this, kind of as my opening, remarks, and I look at the underlying sort of assumptions that are leading to this, what I would say is it seems to be very physical, okay, and very, very focused on the physical talisman. And so the magic is in the talisman, okay, the talisman causes the magic. Without the talisman, there wouldn't be any magic. Anything done physically to the talisman affects the magic. Okay, so it kind of feels like, to me, like sort of delicate electronic equipment. I mean, you can't get it wet, it'll short out. Don't drop it, it'll break it, it won't work anymore. So you've really got this basic sort of assumption that the magic is caused by physical or energetic forces, or at least it's heavily affected by them. Okay, and I think this also fits in with I think the predominant model for how people look at talismans is as a battery. Okay, there's this energy, and it's charged with the energy, and then it radiates it out. And so this is kind of it makes sense. Just like, if you mess up the battery or something, it'll lose the energy. You have to be very careful. They're very delicate. And this whole idea that of the battery for energy, there are significant numbers of people out there that think that we're talking about some kind of scientific energy. So we're talking about magnetism, or we're talking about electricity, or we're talking about quantum entanglement, or something scientific. Okay, and so obviously that's mechanical. The reality is that there's zero evidence of any scientific causality for magic. Okay, so it's not magnetism and not quantum entanglement. I mean, there's like I said, no evidence whatsoever. So other people will say, well, it's spiritual energy. So it's akin to electromagnetic spectrum, but it's or light or whatever, but it's not. It's spiritual. Again, you're very much dealing with this physical energetic. It's very much in the sort of atheistic materialism, which holds it. This is a modern worldview. Nothing exists except matter and energy. And so that's pretty much in line with that. So it's interesting because traditional worries about talismans would be more along the lines of worrying about the spiritual state of the user. I mean, you would need to be celibate, need to fast, you'd have to go to confession to make sure you're not in a state of sin. Occasionally, once in a blue moon, get people asking me about this, but that the spiritual state of the user is not something that people are really focused on. They're very much focused on, like I said, the physical talisman and this sort of physical causality, energetic causality that the talisman is responsible for. The next thing I think is very pervasive, and this would be true traditionally as well, is that what we're dealing with is something that's extremely dangerous, or it's at least very easy to make a very serious mistake. And there's super serious consequences for a very minor mistake. You could do something inadvertently and it would, like I said, destroy the talisman, destroy the magic, or have this really terrible blowback. Again, this really reminds me of sort of a very expensive, very delicate electronic device, or even worse, something like radioactivity. It's putting out these invisible, horrible beams. You need to watch out for that. It's very dangerous. You need to be very careful with it. Okay. Again, this is a very mechanical approach. Traditionally, they would have been worried about the magic being dangerous because you're dealing with demons. I mean, it's this evil magic. It might be powerful, but it's very bad, and you got to be very careful dealing with it because very, very horrible things can happen. On the other hand, another thing that this goes along with is that this is super powerful, and you can instantly get what you want, but you have to do everything perfectly. So there's 50 different things you got to do, and if the slightest thing goes wrong in the election for the talisman, in the creation of the talisman, the materials of the talisman, the appearance of the talisman, and the handling or storage, one little thing goes wrong, that's why you didn't win the $900 million Powerball. If you had done everything right, you would have got that $900 million. You'd be a billionaire right now. But that explains why you didn't do it. I think there's also, we're talking about stuff that's being passed around on the internet. Stuff is sticky. You get a meme, particularly for fear. I mean, that punches people's buttons. It tends to get attention. So even if people are putting out, less fearful stuff, the stuff that's, that is punching out the fear, that is, making people nervous, that is talking about danger, is going to get their attention. So I think that's also, that stuff it's like the news. I mean, you want to hear about the million people that had a great day, you just hear about the one person that had a disastrous day. I think also there's a problem with the these, if you touch it, it causes a problem, that it's anecdotal. And that's really difficult when you're talking about a spiritual causality. I mean, a stranger touched my talisman, and 6 months later my nephew's barber's daughter fell down the stairs. Absolute proof that it's dangerous to have people touching your talisman. So I think that's another problem with it, is people, they have one experience with something and, they know exactly what happened. It's like, well, that's maybe a little bit of hubris in terms of understanding the causality there. But nevertheless, if you're coming at it with these underlying assumptions, okay, that this is extremely dangerous and very physical, it's not unreasonable to take this approach. It's not unreasonable to be ultra cautious and very worried about all these different things, if those are your underlying assumptions. But it's possible to operate from different assumptions. And again, this is not wrong, it's just different. Okay, so my approach, of course I prefer my approach because it's mine, but again, it's just a preference, is the devotional approach. And so in my view, the magic is coming not from the physical talisman, but from the relationship with the celestial angels. And the talisman is just a means of communication. It's a portal or window. It's a very, it's sort of like having the cell phone number. You can call them right up. It's easy to, if you've got the talisman, it's very easy to contact them, very easy to get into communication with those celestial angels. And so, but once the message gets through, the mechanism for how it's communicated is really not that important. So again, the magic, the power comes from interacting with celestial angels and developing a relationship with them. And again, I see these as, they're angelic. These are very powerful but benign and wise beings. So it's like prayer. I mean, prayer is definitely worthwhile. You should, it's definitely worth doing. But if you pray for something, you're not going to necessarily get it. And it's not because you messed things up or you made a mistake or there's something wrong. It's just like that was not, that's not was the appropriate will of the angels. They know, essentially they know what's best. And that's going to be hard for people. I've seen that denounced. People say, I want what I want when I want it. And I don't want someone saying to me that some angel's, wise enough not to get it. It's like, well, again, different approach. So when I look at a talisman, what I would say about it is that, again, the talisman to me is not the locus of the magic, but it's important to treat it respectfully. It's connected to the celestial angels. It's a means for communicating with them. You want to show respect to them by showing respect to the talisman. It's sort of like getting an expensive watch from a rich uncle. You wouldn't just toss it in the ground or let your dog chew on it. You'd take care of it. And so my approach tends to be pretty practical. I mean, I think in terms of wearing a talisman next to your skin, the problem with that is that you're going to sweat on it and it's going to tarnish. And precious metals will tarnish. So that's actually a good, we're talking about cleaning. What I recommend if you've got tarnish on a talisman is a sunshine cloth. This is a cleaning cloth. You can get these on Amazon. These are great. We use these ourselves. You can just take and polish them up. And it does surprise me. People have not run across tarnish before. I get people emailing me and they're in a panic. The talisman's turning black and it's inexplicable to them. And I'm like, well, it's tarnish. And it's just a natural process. And not something to get worried about or think that there's some problem with the talisman or the magic's not working. It's just, polish it. And again, I like to keep my talismans, polished every so often. The ones that are sitting on the altar, they're sort of exposed to the air. So every so often, I'll, take a time and, polish them. And again, not because I'm worried about the magical beams being blocked or it's ruining it, but just as a sign of respect to the celestial angels. So again, going along with the whole idea of respect, I like to store the talismans. I think with astrological talismans, you could have them close together, even on the same altar, but I like to have their own little space. And so, like I said, keep them on the altar. We have our talismans in a box. It's a nice place to store the talisman once you get it. We also have these really nice pouches that we use. It's another nice, respectful way to store your talisman. And I tend to, when I have talismans, keep in the zip. That's a good idea too. I mean, if you keep it in the zip and you put it on the altar, it's going to tarnish less. It's going to be protected from damage. So I think that's kind of can be useful. But as you can see, a lot of this is just practical. It's just one of those things of like you want to keep it clean, you want to show your respect, and but it's not going into this idea that somehow it's blocked or ruined or whatever. Because I still don't think that's true. I mean, you could lose the talisman and you're not losing the relationship. It's like if you lost your friend's cell phone number or the burner phone you always call them up on, it doesn't mean you're not friends with the person anymore. And to me, rather than wearing it being the focus or focusing on the physical talisman, what I like to do is to do repeated consecrations. And a repeated consecration, you're getting in touch with the angel, you're interacting with them, and you're keeping the friendship going. And to me, that's the best way of getting the most positive effects. But again, this is a devotional approach. And so ultimately, with the devotional approach, if you make a mistake, the angels are forgiving. It's not a disaster. So almost no matter what happens, even if it's something big, if you repent, you explain yourself, the angels are going to be forgiving. These are your friends. It's not somebody who's going to be blowing up and stomping out on you because you made one minor mistake. So that's the devotional approach. As you can see, it's not coming from a state of fear, but coming from a state of respect. And so, but again, I don't insist that this is the only way or the right way to do it. What you want to do is to find the approach that resonates for you. And, as you're doing that, recognizing that there's lots of different ways of going about this and respecting other people's autonomy and respecting their right to do things. And it's, I think, really important not to get stampeded or frighten people into doing things. It's like, I'm not going to come on and say you have to do my approach or your head's going to explode if you don't. And I think that's just, like I said, common courtesy. If someone has a different approach, to respect that and not to be condemning people for following that approach. So like I said, lots of different ways of going about this. And as typical, I seem to fall into the minority view. So I wanted to kind of put it out there so people recognize that there's, this consensus that seems to be arising is just coming from certain assumptions or certain approaches. There are other ways to go about it. And so look into it, see all the different possible approaches and find the approach that resonates for you. So great talking to you, and I look forward to doing more videos here at Renaissance Astrology.